Um, welcome to Reform Thinking. So, picture this for a second.
Yeah.
You are an 80-year-old shepherd, right?
Right. A very old man living a quiet life.
Yeah. And you have zero military backing. You have no political capital whatsoever. Honestly, you don't even have a smooth, polished speaking voice.
You're pretty much the absolute opposite of a polished statesman.
Exactly. I mean, absolutely.
Okay.
Now, imagine walking straight into the throne room of the most intimidating ancient empire on Earth.
It's a staggering image.
It really is.
Yeah.
You're standing before a man who literally believes he keeps the universe from collapsing into chaos, and you are telling him to surrender his entire enslaved labor force right now.
And you have nothing but a wooden stick in your hand.
Right. You're delivering this message of total dominion and coming judgment to a king who is, worshipped as a living deity. Okay, so let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Today, we are bringing you a deep dive into the source material concerning a massive, world-altering confrontation. We're looking at the book of Exodus, specifically chapter 7, verses 1 through 7.
Which is such a dense, heavy passage.
It is. And for you listening, we have a stack of sources today. We are looking specifically at an expository and systematic commentary on this text. And we are approaching this from a strict Reformed, cessationist, and dispensational perspective.
Which really shapes how we read this text.
Yeah, it does. We are looking at a scene of sheer, terrifying gravity here. Moses and Aaron carry a divine mandate that alters the course of human history, and they do it with, frankly, incredible personal hesitation.
Yeah, that hesitation is striking. And what sets the tone for our entire analysis today is how this text deliberately strips away all reliance on human strategies.
How so?
Well, we often look at monumental shifts in history, right? And we try to find the human ingenuity behind them. We want to find the brilliant general or the charismatic orator who made it all happen.
Right, the hero of the story.
Yeah, but this passage just refuses to allow that kind of thinking. The core message we find in these 7 verses is that human weakness is a stark reality. And human wickedness is a terrifying reality. But neither of those things reigns supreme. The supreme reality governing all things is the sovereign decree of Yahweh.
Which is a huge comfort, honestly.
It is. The text demonstrates that the living God does not adjust his commands to accommodate the frailties of his messengers. And he absolutely refuses to soften his truth to appease a hostile, rebellious monarch.
He doesn't compromise.
Not at all. His decree is absolute, and he accomplishes his will through means that leave no room for human boasting.
Okay, so before we can truly grasp the theology of that confrontation, we must understand the geopolitical and spiritual reality of Egypt in 1446 BC.
That is so crucial.
Right, because if we do not ground this in history, we lose the weight of what is actually happening. We're not just talking about a generic ancient kingdom in a vacuum.
No, this is the New Kingdom period of Egypt.
Yes, and most conservative scholarship places this during the reign of Amenhotep II. The setting is the incredibly fertile, heavily fortified Nile Delta. This was basically the crown jewel of the ancient world.
It was the superpower of its day.
Yeah. And we have to recognize who Pharaoh was in the minds of his people. He was not just a politician or a strongman. He was worshipped as a literal, physical deity.
Right. He was considered the earthly incarnation of the god Horus.
Wait, like they actually believed he was a god walking around?
Absolutely. His primary mandate was to maintain cosmic order, a concept the Egyptians called Ma'at.
Ma'at, okay.
Yeah. So when you stood before Pharaoh, you were standing before the man who supposedly kept the sun rising, the Nile flooding, and the universe from collapsing into total chaos.
Wow. So disrupting Pharaoh was not just treason.
No, it was viewed as an attack on the fabric of reality itself.
That historical backdrop is critical. And, our sources point out that this text is an infallible historical record.
Which we need to defend.
Right. When we approach this passage, we must explicitly reject that naturalistic, liberal, historical, critical scholarship that has plagued academia for the last 2 centuries.
Specifically, things like the JDDP documentary hypothesis.
Yeah, can you unpack that real quick for the listener?
Sure. So that theory originated with German higher criticism back in the 19th century. It basically attempts to slice the Pentateuch into late hypothetical documents.
Like they don't think Moses wrote it.
Right. They label these supposed sources the Yahwist, the Elohist, the Deuteronomist, and the priestly sources. Those critical theories attempt to strip the text of its historical weight.
They just assume it's made up.
Yeah, they operate on an anti-supernatural bias. They claim this is just a mythical tale or maybe a later editorial creation designed by priests in the Babylonian exile to give Israel, a unified national origin story.
Because they refuse to believe miracles can happen.
Exactly. I mean, spot on. They assume Moses could not have written this because it contains miraculous predictive elements,
Yeah.
but Moses wrote this as a factual, literal eyewitness account.
And the reality he was documenting was dark. I mean, Egypt was steeped in a massive system of polytheism and demonic idolatry, backed up by sorcerers, magicians, and priests who wielded real dark influence to solidify Pharaoh's authority.
It was a very oppressive spiritual atmosphere.
Very. And on the other side of the social spectrum, the Israelites were viewed as subhuman laborers. They were crushed at the very bottom of a brutal, unforgiving hierarchy. They weren't citizens. They were machinery for the empire.
Just fuel for Pharaoh's building projects?
Right. So it is such a massive contrast. It is like two guys with zero security clearance, wearing dirty clothes from the desert, walking into a highly fortified military command center and telling a supreme dictator to surrender his entire labor force immediately.
And they are making this demand based on the authority of a god that the dictator does not even recognize.
It is almost comical how outmatched Moses and Aaron appear on paper. But I want to push back on something for a second, or at least ask a question that maybe you listening might be thinking.
Sure, go ahead.
Why does the historical literalism of this account matter so much? I mean, some might argue that as long as we get the moral lesson of the story, that God liberates the oppressed and confronts tyranny, the actual dates and facts of 1446 BC are secondary.
I hear that argument a lot.
Right. Why do we need to defend the literal historical reality of this specific confrontation in the Nile Delta? What do we lose if this is just an inspiring fable?
I lose everything, seriously, because if this is simply an allegory, the supreme authority of God over real, tangible nations is completely lost.
The history gives it weight.
Yes. The historical reality sharpens the doctrinal truth. This is not a fable about good triumphing over evil in some abstract, ethereal realm like a fairy tale.
Like Lord of the Rings or something.
Right. This is a direct, literal clash of kingdoms taking place in space and time. You have the kingdom of dark paganism, represented by Pharaoh and his court, coming into direct conflict with the sovereign, self-revealed kingdom of Yahweh.
A real clash on real dirt.
Yeah. If God did not literally intervene in history to judge Egypt, manipulate the physical plagues, part the literal Red Sea, and deliver his people, then his promises lack any objective substance.
They're just empty words.
Exactly. The literal truth of these events establishes that Yahweh is the absolute sovereign over actual history, geography, and human governments. If the history is fake, the theology is fake.
Wow.
Our faith is a historical faith. It rests on the fact that God actually spoke, actually acted, and actually redeemed a physical people from a physical slave camp. If we surrender the history to the liberal scholars, we surrender the character of God along with it.
That makes perfect sense. The theology demands a historical anchor. And, knowing the terrifying reality of Pharaoh's court and the historical stakes makes the men God chose to send even more shocking.
It really does.
Let's look at the delegation of divine authority and human weakness, specifically in verses 1 and 2. Moses is 80 years old, and his brother Aaron is 83.
Not exactly in their prime.
No, not at all. They have spent the last 4 decades living in complete obscurity, tending sheep in the Midianite wilderness. I mean, Moses was once a prince of Egypt, but that was a lifetime ago.
40 years is a long time to be forgotten.
Yeah, and he has just finished complaining to God in the previous chapters about having, quote, uncircumcised lips.
Which is a very vivid way of saying he feels totally unfit.
Right. He's basically saying he has a stutter or a speech impediment, and he's unable to speak effectively. And God's response to all that anxiety and perceived inadequacy is fascinating.
He doesn't coddle him at all.
No. He does not coddle Moses. He says, "See, I have made you a god to Pharaoh, and Aaron your brother shall be your prophet."
The Hebrew clause syntax in that response requires careful attention because it reveals the absolute certainty of God's decree.
Break that down for us.
Sure. The Lord begins with an imperative, the word which means look or behold.
Okay.
This command forces Moses to stop looking at his own perceived defects, his age and his stutter, and to perceive his newly appointed status. God is reorienting Moses' vision from the horizontal to the vertical.
Look up, basically.
Yeah. Then we have the phrase, Nathatika Elohim Pharaoh, which translates to, I have appointed you a god to Pharaoh.
Okay, Nasadika Elohim LePharaoh.
Yes, and this utilizes a perfective verbal form, specifically a perfect of determination.
So what does that mean grammatically?
It means that God is not saying, I will try to make you a god to Pharaoh, or you have the potential to act like a god. The perfective form indicates a settled, accomplished reality in the divine decree.
So it's already done in God's mind.
It is as good as done before Moses even takes a step. Now, the term Elohim here is, of course, representational.
Right, because Moses isn't actually becoming a god.
No, Moses is not ontologically deified. That would be a blasphemous assertion. Instead, he is acting with the absolute delegated authority of the Almighty.
He's God's representative.
Exactly. The text establishes a very rigid chain of communication. Yahweh speaks to Moses. Moses speaks to Aaron, who is called Nevika, his prophet or spokesman, and Aaron speaks to Pharaoh. Moses stands in the place of God to Pharaoh, delivering the inflexible demands of the covenant Lord.
Here is where it gets incredibly fascinating for me.
Yeah.
God does not give Moses a pep talk to boost his self-esteem.
Not one bit.
He does not say, Moses, you are actually a great speaker, you just need to believe in yourself. He simply asserts his own command and sets up this strict chain of communication.
It is a completely different paradigm than the self-help advice we hear today.
Yeah, it completely shatters it. But it makes you wonder about the strategy from a human perspective. Like, why use an 80-year-old man and an 83-year-old man who have been out of the political loop for 40 years?
From a human military standpoint, it makes zero sense.
Right. If the goal is to secure the release of millions of slaves from a fortified empire, why doesn't God just speak from the heavens directly to Pharaoh? Why not shatter the Egyptian court with a booming voice from the sky? Why route this massive cosmos-shaking demand through the fragile, trembling vocal cords of an 80-year-old shepherd?
What is happening here is that God specifically chooses the weak things of the world to shame the strong. This is a consistent biblical pattern.
We see that everywhere in Scripture.
We do. By selecting two elderly men who have no military might, no political capital, and no natural vigor left, God guarantees that the coming deliverance cannot plausibly be credited to human ability.
Ah, I see.
Think about the alternative. If God had used a young, charismatic, physically imposing military genius who led an armed rebellion,
Then the historians would give that guy the credit.
exactly, they could argue that Israel's escape was simply the result of brilliant human strategy and tactical warfare. They could write textbooks analyzing Moses' battlefield maneuvers.
They can't do that with two 80-year-old men.
No. The advanced ages of Moses and Aaron, coupled with their complete lack of weaponry, ensure that all the glory goes entirely to the Creator.
Wow.
When the greatest empire in the world crumbles before two octogenarians carrying a wooden staff, it proves that the success of the mission relies completely on the divine decree, not on the physical prowess or rhetorical skill of the messengers. God engineered the circumstances so that human pride would have absolutely nowhere to hide.
That sets up a terrifying dynamic. Moses and Aaron now have their marching orders, and they have this delegated authority, but God immediately gives them a reality check.
A very harsh reality check.
Yeah, he guarantees that their primary audience, Pharaoh, will reject the message. This brings us to verse 3 and the first part of verse 4, which detail the decree of sovereign obduracy and hardening.
This is a heavy section.
It is. God explicitly declares, "And I will harden Pharaoh's heart." He tells Moses straight up that Pharaoh's refusal to listen, the Hebrew term lo yishma, is guaranteed by divine decree.
It's locked in.
God is sending them on a mission where the immediate human response will be total, unyielding resistance. The outcome is not left up to Pharaoh's mood that day.
No, and the vocabulary used here demands careful exegesis because this is where many people stumble.
Break down the Hebrew for us again.
We must unpack the Hebrew word kasha, which means to make stiff, stubborn, or obstinate.
Pasha.
Yes. Moses chose this specific word over other available terms like chazak, which means to make strong, or kavd, which means to make heavy.
Why does that matter?
By using kasha, Moses highlights the rigid, unyielding, absolute stiffness of Pharaoh's rebellion. It is a picture of a neck that refuses to bend.
Ah, like a stiff-necked people.
Precisely. Furthermore, this verb is used in the hifil stem, which in Hebrew grammar depicts an intensive causative action.
Causative, so God is causing it.
Yes, it means God is the one causing the stiffness. The syntax also features the independent personal pronoun a, meaning I, which stresses God's active agency, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart.
That is a crucial doctrinal point.
It is, and it's articulated beautifully in the Westminster Confession of Faith, Chapter 3. We are dealing with the doctrine of sovereign reprobation.
Right.
This is an active judicial hardening, not passive permission. God withdraws his restraining grace and actively hardens a stubborn will as a righteous judgment.
He does not just stand by and watch.
No, he doesn't just watch Pharaoh harden his own heart. God is the primary agent orchestrating the hardening to accomplish his sovereign purposes.
So let us ground this, because this raises a massive stumbling block for a lot of people listening.
I'm sure it does.
What does this all mean for Pharaoh's guilt? If God is using the causative hivelos stem and actively causing the hardening, does this make Pharaoh an innocent victim of a cosmic script?
That's the common objection, isn't it?
Right. It sounds a bit like a judge taking a criminal who already hates the law, removing his handcuffs, and handing him over to his own destructive desires just to prove a legal point.
Wow.
Wait, let me finish the thought. If God actively decrees and causes the hardening, how can Pharaoh be held morally responsible for his refusal to let the people go? People hear this and immediately think God is the author of sin, forcing an otherwise neutral guy to do something evil against his will.
Yeah.
How do we reconcile the causative action of God with the moral culpability of Pharaoh?
This raises a vital question, and the answer strikes at the heart of our theology. It completely refutes Arminianism and synergistic theology,
Which argues what?
which argue that human free will is the ultimate deciding factor in history. But Pharaoh was not a neutral, innocent man whom God forced to sin against his will.
Right, he was already enslaving people.
Exactly. God does not inject fresh evil into a pure heart. Pharaoh was already a wicked, God-hating tyrant who was brutally oppressing Israel. We have to look at the mechanics of this judicial hardening.
Okay.
The analogy of the dam is very helpful here. Imagine a massive reservoir of toxic water held back by a concrete dam.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
That toxic water represents the natural depravity and hatred toward God inherent in Pharaoh's fallen human nature. The dam represents God's common grace, which restrains human evil from reaching its maximum potential.
So God is holding back the evil.
Yes. When God hardens Pharaoh's heart, he is not pumping more toxic water into the reservoir. He's simply removing the dam.
Right.
He withdraws his restraining grace. The river of sin flows naturally and voluntarily from Pharaoh's own wicked desires.
So Pharaoh's acting exactly as he wants to act.
Yes. God confirmed a rebellious king and his chosen path to execute righteous judgment. The purpose of this hardening was to multiply his signs Athathai and wonders Mophathai in the land of Egypt.
So Pharaoh's completely guilty.
Pharaoh is held fully morally responsible for his wicked rebellion because he is doing exactly what his sinful heart desires to do, yet his rebellion operates entirely under the meticulous control of the divine decree.
Both things are true at the same time.
Right. Both truths exist simultaneously. Pharaoh sins voluntarily according to his wicked nature, and God sovereignly decrees that hardening for his own glorious purposes. There is no contradiction between God's absolute sovereignty and man's moral responsibility.
That is a staggering reality to consider. God is using the very rebellion of his enemies to accomplish his own glorification.
He always does.
And that guaranteed resistance sets the stage for the true goal of the entire conflict, which is a global display of Yahweh's unmatched dominion. Looking at the second half of verse 4 and verse 5, we see the outstretched hand and the purpose of judgment. Pharaoh's hardened heart is not an obstacle to God's plan. It is the very canvas upon which God will paint his glory through great judgments.
It's a setup.
Right. God promises to lay his hand upon Egypt and bring forth his people. Interestingly, he refers to Israel as my armies, or my hosts, using the Hebrew word tzivlotai.
That word is so key here.
Yeah, he is looking at a beaten-down group of brickmakers and calling them a military host. And the stated goal of all this devastation is explicit. And the Egyptians shall know that I am Yahweh.
The terminology here is incredibly significant, particularly from our dispensational perspective.
How does that perspective shape this?
When God calls Israel tzivlotai, he does not see a disorganized, broken rabble of slaves. His spoken word dictates their identity as an organized military host redeemed for his glory.
He speaks their future into existence.
Yes, based on his covenant promise. This brings us to a core tenet of our hermeneutic. There is a clear biblical distinction between national Israel and the New Testament church.
Which we see playing out here physically.
Absolutely. God's actions in Egypt demonstrate his faithfulness to the physical descendants of Abraham regarding literal land and national deliverance. He made a covenant with Abraham back in Genesis 15,
Right, promising to bring them out.
promising to bring his descendants out of a foreign land with great possessions, and here he is executing that exact promise in real time. Furthermore, the judgments he executes, the plagues, are not random natural disasters or ecological anomalies.
Which is what liberal scholars always try to claim.
Yeah, they try to say, oh, the river just had red algae. No, they are direct, polemical attacks, systematically dismantling the specific false gods of the Egyptian pantheon.
Okay, give us an example.
For example, turning the Nile to blood was a direct strike against Hapi, the god of the annual flooding, and Osiris, whose bloodstream was thought to be the Nile.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and the plague of darkness was a direct assault on Ra, the sun god, who was the supreme deity of the Egyptian state. Yahweh is showing that these supposed gods are utterly powerless.
Just dismantling their whole religious system.
Piece by piece. And the Hebrew verb yada, translated as to know, is vital here. When God says the Egyptians will know he is Yahweh, this is not about them acquiring intellectual trivia or passing a theology exam.
It's not head knowledge.
No, it is an experiential, compelled recognition of God's absolute supremacy forced upon them through devastating judgment.
The contrast is just massive. Think back to chapter 5. Pharaoh arrogantly asked Moses, "Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice? I do not know the Lord, and moreover, I will not let Israel go."
He asked for it.
He really did. And here, God answers that question by promising to dismantle Egypt's entire religious and economic worldview piece by piece. Pharaoh asks for God's identity, and God says he will reveal it by crushing the greatest empire on earth so thoroughly that no one in Egypt will ever doubt who holds true dominion again.
Pharaoh wanted an introduction, and he is going to get one through the destruction of his entire kingdom.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we see that God's justice is as beautiful and necessary as his mercy.
That's a point people often miss.
Yeah, because in modern times, we only want to talk about the love of God. But God reveals himself through decisive acts of judgment against the oppressor, just as much as he reveals himself through salvation for the oppressed.
Absolutely. The knowledge gained by Egypt is a compelled recognition through historical action. It proves that Yahweh is the absolute sovereign over creation. The nations.
Over everything.
Yes. When the Egyptians see the Nile turn to blood, when they feel the boils on their skin, when they sit in 3 days of palpable darkness, they are learning exactly who Yahweh is.
There's no ambiguity left.
None. It leaves the pagan world completely without excuse. God's glory is magnified not just in the liberation of Israel, but in the systematic, terrifying deconstruction of the Egyptian empire.
This historical reality in ancient Egypt establishes a pattern that points directly to the New Testament, and it severely shapes how the modern church must operate.
Let's talk about that.
Verses 6 and 7 show Moses and Aaron responding with exact obedience, doing just as Yahweh commanded them. They did not form an exploratory committee.
They're no focus group.
No, they did not try to soften the message, they just obeyed. That obedience and the entire Exodus event itself contains massive Christological substance and lays down an uncompromising standard for believers today.
The parallels are undeniable.
We have to look at how this points forward to Christ, who is the final greater prophet, priest, and king. The physical exodus from Egypt is a historical type pointing to the spiritual redemption accomplished by Christ on the cross. It is the defining redemptive event of the Old Testament, setting the stage for the defining redemptive event of the New Testament.
The Christology here is robust. While Moses had a delegated authority acting as Elohim to Pharaoh, Jesus Christ possesses inherent eternal divine authority, as outlined in John chapter 1.
Because Jesus is God.
Right. Jesus is not a delegated God. He is the Word made flesh. In this typology, Pharaoh represents the prince of this world, Satan, holding the elect in spiritual captivity and bondage to sin.
That makes total sense.
And deliverance from this spiritual captivity requires a monergistic redemption.
Okay, let's define that term clearly for you listening. Monergism.
Right. Mono means one, and ergon means work. Monergism means that salvation is the work of one party, God alone.
We don't contribute to it.
Exactly. Just as Israel was completely passive, contributing nothing while God stretched out his hand to judge Egypt and part the sea, believers are saved entirely by sovereign grace.
I love this imagery.
It's beautiful. The Israelites did not swim halfway across the Red Sea to meet God in the middle. They stood still on the shore and watched God do all the fighting.
Wow.
We contribute absolutely nothing to our justification except the sin that makes it necessary. Christ bears the wrath, defeats the enemy, and brings his people out of bondage entirely by his own merit and strength.
That brings us to two massive applications for today, and this is where the rubber meets the road for you listening. The first is a firm adherence to cessationism.
Yes.
The sources make a strong point about the nature of the miraculous signs, the authoritative and mophathum, performed by Moses. People might hear about these plagues and wonder why we do not see rivers turning to blood or men parting seas today.
It's a common question.
Those signs were not given just for the sake of spectacle, right? They were given for a specific epoch to authenticate Moses as God's true messenger bringing new revelation.
Precisely. This is a hill we must stand on. As conservative cessationists, we affirm that these miraculous signs were epical.
Meaning they belong to a specific era.
Yes, they do not happen every Tuesday. Throughout biblical history, clusters of miracles occur at specific moments to authenticate new messengers and new revelation.
Like when?
Well, just as the plagues authenticated Moses during the establishment of the Old Covenant and the giving of the law, the miracles of Elijah and Elisha authenticated the prophetic era. And the New Testament apostolic gifts authenticated the early church and the writers of the New Testament.
But once that era is over.
Once the new revelation was established, the signs faded. Those miraculous signs ceased with the closing of the biblical canon.
So we don't need them anymore.
Right. We firmly reject the modern charismatic movement, which constantly seeks new signs, wonders, and supposed private prophecies. Believers today have the perfect, sufficient written word of God.
It's all we need.
We do not need modern prophets claiming new revelation or faith healers putting on spectacles, because the canon of Scripture is complete and entirely sufficient for all matters of faith and practice. Seeking signs today implies that the Scriptures are somehow inadequate, which is a dangerous error.
That is so well said. The second application is a total rejection of modern pragmatism and seeker-sensitive church growth models.
Oh, this is a big one.
Huge. Moses delivered an intensely offensive message of judgment that resulted in increased hostility from his audience. His initial demand actually led to Pharaoh increasing the workload and taking away the straw for the bricks.
It made things worse physically.
Yeah. If modern church growth experts or marketing consultants had been advising Moses, they would have fired him on the spot.
Oh, absolutely.
They would have told him to soften his message, find some common ground with Pharaoh, maybe start a dialogue about shared values, and definitely be, seeker-sensitive.
Right. Don't offend the guy with all the chariots.
Right. It is like treating the pulpit as a corporate marketing platform where the customer is always right, instead of a courtroom where God's absolute decree is read aloud, regardless of how the defendant feels about it.
That's a great analogy.
So, considering this, how should pastors and believers measure success if the audience is openly hostile to the message?
Success is defined by one standard alone: unconditional submission to the written word of God.
Unconditional submission.
Yes. A minister's duty is not to grow a crowd, entertain goats, or make the culture like him. His duty is to declare the whole counsel of God, which includes the reality of sin, divine wrath, sovereign election, and sovereign reprobation.
The hard stuff.
The very hard stuff. Diluting the message to make it palatable to a rebellious culture betrays the God who sent it. If a pastor edits the text, avoids talking about hell, or softens the biblical sexual ethic to avoid offending modern sensibilities,
What is he doing?
he is acting as if he possesses greater wisdom and more compassion than the Creator. He is trying to be a better public relations manager for God than God himself.
Wow. That hit hard.
Moses and Aaron simply went in and said exactly what Yahweh told them to say. Our responsibility is faithful proclamation. The results rest entirely in the sovereign hands of God.
Regardless of the outcome.
Right. If the faithful preaching of the word results in the hardening of the hostile hearer, that is a success because God's justice is vindicated. If it results in the breaking of the repentant heart, that is a success because God's mercy is glorified. The messenger is only responsible for the accuracy of the message, never the response of the audience.
I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over as we close today's deep dive. We look at the rising tide of secular paganism, critical theories, and intense cultural hostility toward biblical truth today. And we often panic.
We really do.
We feel like we are losing ground, like the church is backed into a corner and the culture is winning. But think about this. If the sovereign God of Exodus meticulously decreed the hardening of the greatest ancient monarch to ensure his own glory, could it be that the hostility of today's secular culture is not a sign that God is losing, but the very staging ground He has decreed to manifest his unmatched might in our generation.
That is a staggering thought.
The darkness of Egypt was just the backdrop for the brilliance of the Exodus. We encourage you to rest in the objective truths of historical theology, reject cheap pragmatic compromises, and stand firm on the absolute sovereignty of the covenant king. The same God who crushed the gods of Egypt is on his throne today. Thank you for joining this deep dive on Reformed thinking.